Hi there, welcome back, and apologies for the delay in getting an update to you about this progress that we're making on these Etruscans. I'm now ready to recommence. You join me where I've actually completed a single coat of the tunics on the various figures, and if you can remember, I've broken them into different groups. So we've got a moss group over here, and by that I mean that's what the colour of the paint is I've put on as a base. I've got the Reaper triad here, which is actually what's called a bloodstain red undercoat. Over here I've got a foundry undercoat, which is actually the terracotta, and then I've got this brighter version of the red, which was one of my triads that I've made using the Vallejo colours. So this is a dark red, a red, a carmine red, and just a flat red as a base, as a highlight. So what I'm going to do now is just do the armour. So as part of this, I've gone back to the rest of the army to look at what I'm trying to match the figures against. Okay, and here we've got something I've done a little bit differently here, which is I've done a triad, but I've left quite a bit of black showing. To be honest, I don't know why I did that. I must have just been in the right mood for that. It's created quite a nice effect. That's what I would call tabletop distance. But the important bit here is that we want the armour on these guys to look the same as the group that we're trying to mix them with. So this for me is a foundry triad, and I've got what was originally the 36 triad or colour set. Excuse me. Now I've had to go and buy some new ones here because I've run out, put it simply. Most of my paint looks a bit the worse for wear, like this one. And I've gone off and I've got the new Foundry Gold. Now you might say, well, why is Alan using a gold when it was, bronze? But this sort of gold effect, or this yellower effect for the armor, rather than perhaps the bronze that we would understand as a modern color, is exactly accurate. And then if you look at any of the sort of Vallejo colours that are labelled antique bronze or similar, you'll see that they've got this sort of goldy effect. We don't want it too much, but we just want enough to actually represent the polished bronze that the troops wore. Now, the interesting thing for me is I've got the replacement gold here and my old brazen, which was the original 36A. Now, I don't know if you can see, they look quite different here. So I'm a little bit nervous about that. The gold that I've got following on kind of works with both both sets, as it were. But I'm going to try giving this a good old shake, i.e. the new paint, and then comparing it with the brazen. I've probably got just enough left in here if I need to go round these ones, but I'm just more than interested, for my own sake more than anything, just to try these two out. So I might get a little bit of white paper, pot them on, put a decent amount of colour on each one, and then compare it. So I'll do that and give you guys a look. Okay there. So this is the result of my test. Over here we've got my original brazen 36A followed by the new gold 36A from Foundry. You can see quite clearly that there's a difference. I don't think the new Foundry colour is a problem. I think it's going to work quite well with the 36B shade that I've got new, because that's very much similar. However, I'm going to stick with the 36A, and this now becomes something that I will husband and look after a little bit carefully, because I want it to match these figures here. And the point really is, always make sure you keep a record of what you're painting with. Always try and make sure you've got enough raw material, if you like, to actually complete the figures. And things will change. Even though manufacturers do their best to keep things consistent, that's maybe not always going to be the case. Right, so what I'm going to do now is get some of this ready to go and then start painting the armour. Welcome back. We're now at the stage where I'm going to paint the armour and some of the cuirasses, or the Linthorax cuirasses that we see on this figure here. But we'll start with the metallic, which, as I described before, will be a Foundry 36A, but from my original batch, and this follows exactly the same process as all the other painting so far, in that we're going to paint an undercoat, sorry, the first layer, and hopefully you can see this as I paint it on and it will focus nicely. So I've done quite a few of them already, but now all I'm doing is painting the first colour of the armour over the, obviously, the parts that need to be covered. As I said to you before, for some reason when I did the Etruscans the first time round, oops, I left quite a bit of lining, you know, as in I didn't quite close up all of the sections of the figures, particularly around the armour. So like this little gap here that I'm leaving at the bottom of the cuirass, that's consistent with what I did earlier on the other batch of models. And for consistency, if no other reason, I want to carry on following that principle with these figures. Again, personal taste, do whatever you think feels comfortable and sort of experiment a bit. And if you go over the line like I just did there, don't worry about it too much. The overall effect, honestly, is not going to be compromised by anything that we're doing in this regard, or at such a sort of like early stage of the process. We want to just make sure that we cover the sections of the figure where the armour should be. And again, we're going to come back and paint this strap a bit later on, so we don't need to worry about that too much. And apologies again, this is a bit awkward for me because I'm holding the figure out in front of me. So hopefully you can see sort of areas that we're getting into. When we're painting the figures. So that's pretty good. I mean, actually, I think on this figure, yeah, this is one of the darker figures, as in that this colour here is one of the figures painted with the terracotta initial shade. And I do personally think it's important to get different shades to your reds. After all, they were dyed by hand back in those days, and also, you know, they aged. So I would presume that the dyeing or the coloration from the dye faded over time, just like modern clothes do, especially in the heat of the Mediterranean and that strong sun. So we're just going to finish this one off to a reasonable standard. Again, this is only the base coat. What we're trying to do is make sure that everywhere that should be covered is covered, and we try not to go over anything that we've already painted. So hopefully, oops, let the camera focus for a bit. You can see the sort of stage that we're at. I'm just going to move these to one side a little bit so that I can perhaps put it down here. I'm going to do the same thing for the greaves. And honestly, this isn't that difficult because you're trying to paint the sections that are proud of the figure, if that makes sense. We've done all of the inner work on the skin in this particular case, and we're just trying to pick out the upper or more protruding sort of elements on the figure itself. But again, if you do find that you've managed to run into something that you've already painted, get the paintbrush out and just go over it before you carry on too much further. And the more practice you become, the less likely that is to occur. Apologies if this looks a little bit painful, but as I say, I'm holding it in front of me in an attempt to provide the clearest picture that I can for you guys on the video. And as I said, one of the beauties of a black undercoat is if you've got the occasional area where you've not covered it in paint, or it's a challenge, just go with it. Let it sit as black. It will probably, in 99% of the cases, just provide a little bit more depth, and certainly at tabletop sort of viewing distances is not going to compromise the overall look of the figure. So we're going to stop there, I think, except that what I might do is just put that for the time being as a bit of bronze as well. Okay, so that's one of those from outside the shop, which is, as I say, the terracotta base. I'm just going to wash the brush out and show you the same sort of thing on the Linthorax cuirass that we've got here. Okay, so before I do this guy's helmet in the same 36A, I thought I'd show you what I do with this sort of linen cuirass, this glued or layered garment that Greeks wore. Now, really the principle here was that they were trying to create something which was very tough but lightweight. You know, that never-ending search, as all armour is really, for something which provides more manoeuvrability and an ease of wear, if you like, but also allows the actual wearer to receive a high degree of protection. And a lot of work has been done in terms of recreating this sort of type of garment, and I used to think that this was a layered and glued garment, but I think there's some modern research that suggests that's not quite the case. But in any event, it was very effective, and all we're going to do is take a foundry Boneyard 9A, and we're going to try and run that initially down these sections. And again, trying to work at a slightly odd angle, but hopefully you get the picture. People have different techniques on this. Some people will dry brush this, as in make the brush very dry and try and brush it across the surface, catching the detail as they go. I've always tended to paint down the actual terugis, or these sort of strips that are falling below to provide the protection, the sort of groin area. Because this is the base coat, if you do sort of bleed into the undercoat in terms of the black, it's not a big deal. Most of these cuirasses were sort of off-white, so hence I've used the Boneyard, which will give me that slightly linen-y effect that I'm looking for. But I have successfully done light browns and similar, and I think that really adds to the variation of the figures. So some of these that you'll see later as we go through will have anything ranging from this off-white to a light brown, and if we're catching any of the undercoat, any of the base coat, as I say, it's not really a problem. So we're going to carry that round. Similarly, on the top section here, might leave a little bit around these straps just to accentuate the depth. We'll come back and do the actual belts on the figure a bit later on. Probably should have stirred this paint a little bit better, or mixed it. I'm just trying to be a bit lazy. But I'm not bothered by this lack of coverage, if you like, or this, shall we say, the fact that it's not a clear paint. Don't worry about that for a base coat. We're going to put a mid coat on and possibly a highlight. Oops. Let's come back here and try and make sure that you can actually see what's going on. But again, same principles apply as everything else really. We've done our base coat, as in we've done the painting of the colours nearest the figure, you know, inside out, as I've mentioned a few times. So this should be something that you find relatively easy in the grand scheme of things, because we're trying to promote a painting technique that does the difficult bits first, and as you work out becomes progressively easier. What you will find is as the acrylic dries, and it will dry fairly quickly in any kind of decent conditions, you can add a little bit of additional depth by putting effectively a second coat on. Okay. Give it a bit of a sanity check. As I said, I do apologise. This is not my fault really, with this lack of consideration of the paint itself in terms of properly prepping. And really that just means giving it a good old stir really, and ideally putting it into a separate receptacle rather than using it direct from the paint lid as I am here. But actually I'm quite pleased with that. So I'm going to repeat the process, the other ones that need the same attention, then paint this guy's bronze helmet, and we'll come back for the next stage. Thank you. Okay, so I've decided to do this one properly, just to give you a better view as to what can happen. I've moved the, or sorry, that's how it should be done, and I've moved the camera a little bit closer, which hopefully will mean that it renders a little bit better. Same sort of thing here, where you've got a nice black undercoat. In this particular case, the strips are a little bit easier because they're somewhat larger. I've actually put the paint, having given it a stir with a good old cocktail stick, into a little receptacle, so that we make life a little bit easier for ourselves in terms of thickness and consistency of the paint. And again, what we're doing is just running down the terugis first, or the strips that fall underneath. And I quite like the effect of having the black in between the strips, but obviously that's a personal thing. Again, just experiment, see what you like. This figure's got quite a bit of black hair. It's a sort of Spartan style figure with the long hair. It's braided. In fact, this is a Gorgon Miniatures Spartan Hoplite. But again, because we're going to come back and paint over this, no problem with getting the brush in there and, you know, effectively obscuring the hair for a little while. And again, just get as much of this as you feel comfortable doing. And by that, I mean, if you leave a little bit of black inside, don't worry about it. The overall effect of the figure may actually be enhanced. It will just create more depth. And I certainly would not attempt to go too far into the figure if you think it's going to compromise any other paint that you've already applied, as it were. So certainly don't risk putting it on flesh or any of the uniform that we've done so far. Remember, what you can't get to may not be seen at all anyway. Okay, we've got quite a thick strap there. Again, we'll come back to that. And although I've talked about triads a lot, sometimes you find that the bulk of the work is certainly done between the base coat and then the first mid coat, if you like, with very little being required on the highlights. So don't assume that you're applying this in equal measure, because you're certainly not. Hopefully the camera's behaving itself. Again, we've got a section here where we're going to have a shield. Now, I like to try and paint as much of the figure as I can, but again, if you want to take some shortcuts and make allowances for the shield, feel free. There we go. So again, that's one of the darker red ones, which I think belongs over here. What else have we got to do? Another one. As I said, normally I wouldn't do them all the same colour, but do you know what? I think I've only got 3 or 4 of these to do, and I think because they've all got different uniform colours, I'm going to crack on and do them all with the boneyard. In this particular case, and I said what we're trying to achieve is a nice off-white linen style effect after we finished. So I've only got a few more to do. I think I've got one more here. That's actually one that requires some bronze. So I think I've only got a couple to finish in this style, and then we'll start applying the second coats to the tunics. Thanks. Okay, welcome back. Just to recap, what we've done now is we've painted all of the basic tunic colours. We've applied some banding where that was appropriate and where we felt that it added to the figure. I've painted the armour, and that that doesn't just include the bronze armour, but as we did a few moments ago, I've also painted the linthrax, or this linen type cuirass. Just below, in front of me now, we're going to tackle the second coat on the tunics. So this is trying to sort of take this base coat here and provide the sort of lift that we're looking for in terms of providing that depth and realism. And this is actually a very simple process. What I've actually done here is picked up the Foundry figure that I painted with a Foundry Moss 29A it is, and I've just selected the next one in the triad, the 29B. So again, don't have to be sticking with a particular manufacturer's paints, but what we're trying to do here is just take this colour and lighten it. So you could take an original colour that you painted and just add some white, or perhaps some sand to it that would just lift it, and that will depend on the type of colour that you're painting. Obviously it's a very convenient thing if the manufacturer's provided a triad for us. So just off screen I've just mixed up the next set of paint, and it's this sort of colour that you can see here in the receptacle. Quite thick in terms of general acrylics. You can thin, but I tend not to worry too much about a mid coat because I want to actually get some of this detail on here. And apologies, I may not be as dexterous trying to demonstrate it this way, but all we're trying to do is lift out some of the higher parts of the figure's clothing, and just leave a bit of the base coat in sections where we feel that that's going to reflect the folds of the clothing. And this is a little bit like painting at arm's length with a long long stick, so it's not quite as comfortable as it would normally be, but hopefully you get the general impression, even if my execution is leaving a little bit to be desired. And actually, judging how much base colour to leave is again a bit of a personal thing, and I tend to start with a fairly large gap, as it were, and then see how the figure progresses, see how the sort of appearance changes, and if you close it off too much, it's not really a problem because you can go back and visit it again. If you don't do it enough, similarly you can go back and do it. I would also point out that the colour changes a little bit as the figure dries, and this is where a really detailed figure can help us. If there's quite a lot of relief or contrast between the different layers on the figure, this will really help this sort of technique, because it becomes easier to pick the folds of the clothing out in terms of the surface detail, and just helps us render the figure a little bit better. As you can see, this one is predominantly tunic, because it's not got the same sort of armour that perhaps its colleagues have got. And I just thought that was quite a useful way of illustrating the principle. And remember, we're going to go back and lightly apply some highlights to this figure, so we've got another opportunity to get some depth for the figure. As I said, you can always go back and line in detail that you think you may have obscured. And actually, this is the sort of thing that you quickly develop a feel for. And again, we're trying to get a visual presentation that suits what I would call tabletop viewing. In other words, that sort of general impression you get of the figure, rather than trying to look at it in microscopic detail. Most of the time your figures will certainly stand up to closer inspection, but again, we're trying to get the overall look of a figure in terms of its on-table presentation, how it looks within the unit, etc. So I'm just going to put a little bit more on here, take that down a little touch there, and sorry if the camera keeps floating in and out, but you can hopefully see the effect there. It's a little bit difficult when it's shiny from being wet, but we'll come back and take a look at that one when it's dried. The rest of them, exactly the same principle. We're going to do these ones that I've selected out here because they've got the moss. Same principle on these, and we'll come back and have a look at those when they're all finished. See you soon. Actually, before we finish this section, I thought I might just pick this figure out. He's a slightly odd figure in terms of position. This is a Gorgon Miniatures Etruscan spearman, class 2, I think, or class 2 spearman. Obviously, this one's much more of a mixed figure. We've got some bronze for the helmet, the greaves, and this chest plate. We've got a little bit of banding. So I thought maybe it's just worth doing this one, just to say that it's exactly the same principle. You take a little bit of your paint, try and pick out where you'd like the raised part to be picked out, and if you go over the red at this stage, in this case on the banding, not a big deal. This one is a little bit more of a challenge, only because this one doesn't have quite the same sort of folds in terms of the tunic, so we're going to have to create our own way on this one a little bit. So this one's going to be more about just drawing attention to the higher parts rather than picking out specific folds, although they are there if it's not come across too much on the video. And again, we're going to highlight some of this a bit later anyway. And as I've said before, highlighting is very much light touch for me. And if I've got enough stark contrast on most of the figure, then you know, I will occasionally really minimalise any sort of highlighting. The other thing to say is we're looking at a figure here still partially complete. We're starting to get this overall feel, but we're very much still in the process of getting things organised, and all of this will change once we start putting highlights or mid coats on this red for the banding, and again on the armour itself and the straps that we've got around there. But hopefully you can see the general effect that we're going for. Get in there a little bit and around the top there. So we've left enough of the base coat just to give us that depth. We've got some mid coat on, and that's really the sort of effect that we're looking for. And again, apologies if that's not the world's best. I have actually got myself some new lighting here, but even so, oops, it's still a challenge to present this, especially when the camera rendering picks up the gloss. Okay, right, so I'll finish all of these off and show you the next stage. Right, so I thought I'd take this opportunity just to show you how I paint the helmet crests. And I think these were made predominantly out of horsehair and then dyed. And I tend to use blacks, whites, maybe some browns, which I think maybe probably more natural. And also the white, which I'm just demonstrating here now. And this is kind of the way I tackle it. So this is the base coat in terms of my white triad. But what I do is I sort of try and draw the brush along the horsehair crest, and oops, just don't worry so much about giving a great deal of coverage, simply because I want the sort of depth of the plume to come through. So we're just doing that. I haven't done the tunic on this one yet, but we'll do that in a mo. So pretty much you can do this in any order that you like. I just was using the white to actually put on some more banding, so some of the figures I'd missed. And I thought, you know what, it's probably a good time to show you that in terms of the helmet crests. So I've probably done, what have I done? 4 helmet crests in white. I'll probably do a couple in a light brown, and then the rest I'll leave black, and we'll highlight those later. So I'll see you shortly. Hello folks. Right, it's been a little while since I updated this video. In fact, it's been a number of weeks since I actually picked up these Etruscans, so now we're going to just go into the final stretch and finish them off. Just going to explain what we're going to do next. I think I left you last time having done a couple of these figures and picking out the second sort of base coat. So I put the underneath coat on, I put the black undercoat on, put the first colour on, and then we put the secondary coat on. I will put some highlights on, but before we get to that stage, what I'm going to do is just run round some of these figures, making sure that I've got second coats on everything. So that's everything from the armour to the horsehair crests to some of the banding that I've got. So pretty much that just continues the process that you've seen before, with us putting that sort of, I don't want to use the term highlight, but really just picking out the raised areas. So in other words, if the clothing is folded, you're not looking to pick out the inner fold, you're looking to pick out the material that's proud of that fold, if that makes sense. Similarly with the armour, what we're trying to do is pick out the higher parts of the armour, just to really, in this particular case, on this muscled cuirass, show the fact that the armourer has actually created that profile. So I'm going to switch the video off, but get myself set up ready for painting, run through a few techniques, and then I'll largely finish the rest of the figures so that we can then move on to something more interesting like painting the shields. Right, so all I've done is prep some of the Foundry 36B metallic paint here. Again, I find it a useful tip really would be to keep the figures that you're trying to match. So this is the style that I've created for the current army. May not be the way that I want to paint them now, but what I want this to do is to blend in. So I've got quite a lot of dark here, and I'm going to try and keep this unit for the army very much in the same mould. But again, this isn't rocket science. This is just doing what we've done before, which is let's pick this figure. This is quite a good one. So as you can see here, we've got the cuirass modelled quite nicely. So we just take this, and we're just trying to pick out the higher parts, or the outer facing parts of the armour, so that we're creating, or reinforcing really, the relief that's already on the model itself. Put a little line across there. I tend with armour not to come back and do a third highlight, but I'll reserve judgment on the highlighting situation once we've got the rest of the figure done. Hopefully you can see all this quite nicely, but let's see if we can move it to the camera a little bit better. But it's not rocket science, and apologies, I don't normally sort of work at this angle, but hopefully you just get the general gist of what we're up to. And as I said, I wasn't too concerned that the original base coat for this was a bit watery, or a bit should we say affected by the actual black undercoat, because this just helps this line, or this second coat, sort of stand proud. Oops, don't worry if you do what I just did. Go over something that you want to come back to a bit later. Now this is the sort of area here with this sort of ridge line here that I might come back to with a very distinct highlight, but generally I'm just trying to, as I say, reinforce the contours that's already in the figure. Make sure we go down the cheek pieces. Okay. Now this paint isn't quite the same colour that I had from the previous Foundry Triad, because there was a number of years between buying each pot. And obviously ideally you want to make sure that you've got enough paint to complete the entire job. And really, although I'm painting this bronze butt spike now with the second coat, really should have done the first one, or the undercoat on here first. The Greek butt spike on the spear was bronze because it corroded less than the iron that they used, obviously, for the main point. And then what I do on the greaves is the same way that I would paint the leg if it weren't armoured, which is to pick out the shin, pick out the relief in terms of the musculature, and oops, excuse me. And you'll find that that creates quite a nice impression once the figure's finished. So I'll come around here. And whilst I'm here, I'll just put a little line across here. on the actual handle of the weapon itself. And again, you can't really go wrong with this. That's already sort of starting to lift the figure a little bit more. Hopefully you can see that on the camera. That's that one done. On some of these where we've got no armour, just make sure you pick out the helmet, run down the edge there. Carry on in the same vein. So I'll finish that and I'll come back shortly. Thank you. Hi there. So I've run round putting the upper or second coat, sorry, on the armour, as you can see, and I have painted some of the other spears. I don't know if I've mentioned it before in the video, but I thought I'd just go through the colour that I typically use, and it's a Foundry drab. So I'm just going to paint 26A on this one, and then what we'll do is, starting on one of the other figures, I'll put some grain effect on so that you can see how I try and make the spears seem a little bit more realistic. So I'm just going to run through putting some of this on. I tend to use drab for spears, as I say, and then different types of browns for scabbards and belts, etc. But we'll come on to that shortly. For now, let's just apply this paint. And again, apologies, as the paint's wet, sometimes that makes life a little bit more challenging for the video camera to catch and get the right resolution. But this isn't a particularly challenging thing, just a question of keeping relatively steady hand and running through the process. Okay, so I'll just swap the paint over. I'm now going to switch to a drab 12B, this one. What this one has is a slightly lighter effect, and as I say, in a minute I'll show you how I create an impression of a wood grain. Okay, so I've switched to, as I say, this lighter colour. Let's select one of the figures we've got here, and all I'm trying to do with this is the same sort of technique that I showed you on the Samurai Castle, which is just to really sort of pick out a line and put some undulations into the actual line that we're drawing down the length of the spear. And sometimes this is very subtle and quite difficult to see. So and then if I get sort of section where I want to put a proper little wiggle, as it were, sometimes I'll put a little knot in or a little blob in to make it look like a knot. And this really is the sort of thing that is quite difficult to pick up on the camera, but actually does make quite a difference. I'm not sure whether you guys can see that very well, but you can start maybe just to see the outline of it. Again, a sort of squirt, sort of wiggly motion, occasional breaks in the actual grain pattern, as it were, is all very effective. And then I'll leave that to dry, and actually the lightness will actually come through as part of the drying process. Just to illustrate that again, what I think I'll do is I'll get a drab 12C, and I'll show you that perhaps a little bit more stark contrast, and we'll see what that looks like. So here we go, is the 12C, and I'm going to pick, let's pick this one over here. So I probably won't use this in anger, as it were, or for real. This is just a really useful way of demonstrating the technique on the video. So what we're doing is creating this sort of effect. And then when I've got sort of sections where I've put like a little line, we'll actually accentuate that and go round it. And hopefully this creates something which is easier to follow on the camera, because you should be able to see the line that I'm creating. Excuse me. And it's really the sort of thing where there isn't too many ways that you can do this wrong. As long as you create a sort of swirled pattern, and as long as you leave enough of the underlying coat there, you'll get something which, once it's dry and viewed from what I would call, tabletop perspective, gives you a very nice effect. As I say, this is a bit bright really for what we're trying to achieve, but as you saw here, it's a much more subtle effect. And sometimes, I think the best thing to do with this is to let it dry, and then I'll show you the difference. And if one of those things that sort of, you pays your money and takes your choice, as it were. Oops, that's probably a little bit too full. Let's go around here. As I say, the trick is to leave some of the underlying dark colour, and probably not to go too stark in terms of contrast. As I say, I've only done that really just to show you on the video, but hopefully that's useful. And honestly, when the unit's on mass, that will make quite a noticeable difference. So I'm going to carry on with the original 12B, highlight the rest of these spears, and then come back on the video. Okay, so while the spears are drying, I'm going to switch to a 9B. What I'm going to do now is just pick up on the Lintharax that I've painted with the undercoat, or the base colour, sorry, and just repeat the same technique that I've showed you before, just in terms of picking out the Terugis, or these sort of hanging protection at the bottom of the cuirass. I think Terugis stems from the Greek word meaning feathers, or something similar to that, but please don't quote me on that. But obviously the idea here was that the leather strips still provided some protection from a cut or a direct sort of thrust, and certainly something like an arrow, but because of the splits and the flexibility, the wearer was unencumbered and free to move. So hopefully you can see that this isn't a particularly challenging part of the process. We're just picking out the raised portions on the figure, and creating that sort of depth on top of the base. And you saw the figure I'm trying to match against was quite dark, so I'm quite happy to have the stark contrast there with the black. Then we'll move to the top. What I tend to do with the top is paint the edge of the cuirass first, like this, just to get the outline, and then go inside. And I've got a little piece up here around the neck. So that's going to be obviously painted. when I do the straps and the belts, etc. Now here can be a little bit challenging because we've got a belt to go in there. Let's just go in there like that. So again, you can see the real difference that makes compared to the base figure, and that's really the sort of lift that we're trying to achieve. So I'm going to carry on, finish that off on the remainder of the figures, and then reconnect on with you guys on the video. Okay, so moving on quickly, next stage is to start painting some of these belts, scabbards, etc. So I tend to use, well, let me just, a peaty brown, which is a 61 triad from Foundry. I do other browns quite often, and sometimes I use the spear shaft. And what we'll see on some of these figures, when I get to one that's got perhaps more belt or scabbard, etc., is I'll mix the colours up so that we're not all sort of uniform on the same sort of palette on the same figure. But for this guy, a very simple setup here where we've got just this one cross belt and the actual scabbard. So on this particular figure, I'm going to do 61A all the way around. And again, just dragging the brush over the raised portion of the cross belt. And we will come back and highlight this, but again, just running around. So this one, for example, I might do the scabbard a slightly different colour and then just leave the belt as the 61A. This one has got a very Italian style sort of chest and back piece, and that's also got little cross belts holding it in place. So again, we're just trying to get that picked out. And the actual figure, it's sort of in there and then around there. And as I said, this is a slightly odd figure pose. We'll just make sure we cover enough of the black for us to get that impression of the cross belts. So I might come back and use a slightly different brown on that one. Here's a similar figure to the one I started with, so actually let's pick this one out. Same sort of thing here. I think I'll do the scabbard a little bit differently. And as you've seen, I tend to sort of draw along the line. Sometimes I see people go crossways, but I find it easier. I find it harder then to stay on track. Whereas this sort of motion I find quite easy on the hand. Hopefully you can sort of follow it on the video. And I am holding it a little bit oddly to try and show it to the camera, as it were. But again, the odd bit of black undercoat here can actually just help to show the outline of the belts themselves, and I wouldn't knock yourself out trying to get rid of those. But what we obviously want to try and avoid doing is going over the tunic. And again, we've left this till last because this is proud of the figure, so it's raised and therefore should be easier to paint. So you get the idea. So that's that one there. This figure's actually got a headband. I think I may do that white, just because this figure's not got a white tunic. But again, the same sort of process as we've done before. Just repeat this over all the figures in the unit, and I'll come back and show you the next stage.